The late afternoon sun of Northwood Borough, Pennsylvania, cast long, distorted shadows across the neat, compact lawns. It was a picturesque scene, the kind that often lured young families and retirees alike, promising quietude and community. I, Sage Kincaid, at 38 years old, had lived here for over a decade, quietly observing its rhythms and the ever-shifting tapestry of its residents. My world revolved around order and predictable patterns, a necessity born from my work managing a portfolio of rental properties, most of them nestled within a 20-mile radius of my own unassuming bungalow. My nature was often described as astute, a trait I'd honed through years of dealing with various personalities, from the genuinely struggling to the utterly entitled. Pragmatic by instinct, I approached every problem with a clear head, rarely allowing sentiment to cloud my judgment. And unsentimental, absolutely. Emotions were messy, counterproductive. They led to bad decisions and prolonged disputes. I'd seen enough of those to last a lifetime, disputes far worse than a simple blocked driveway. My job had given me a keen eye for individuals who believed rules were optional, a deep-seated frustration with those who disregarded communal living, a motivation that simmered beneath my calm exterior. My house sat on a corner lot, giving me a panoramic view of the street. It was a quiet street, usually. Children's laughter occasionally floated on the breeze, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the occasional friendly wave from a passing neighbor. But recently, a new discordant note had been struck, emanating from the modest two-story house directly across from mine. Its driveway, a narrow strip of asphalt barely wide enough for a single car, had become a point of contention. The new owner of that house was Clara Jensen, a young woman in her mid-20s, fresh out of graduate school, eager to make a quiet life for herself. She was a soft-spoken woman, with kind eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her hands when she was stressed. She moved in about 6 months ago, full of hope, and for a while everything was idyllic. But then Trevor Blackwood arrived. Trevor was the resident enigma. He rented the house adjacent to Clara's, a sprawling, slightly run-down property that clearly saw more parties than actual upkeep. He was a colossal man, easily 6 feet, 5 inches tall, broad-shouldered and self-assured, with a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face. In his mid-20s, he exuded an air of effortless entitlement, as if the world owed him something. He drove a battered silver sedan, a relic that seemed at odds with his polished demeanor, but it was the sedan that became the instrument of his reign of annoyance. It started subtly. A casual park, half on, half off Clara's driveway. Then it became a full block. "I'm just here for a bit," he'd casually tell Clara, his voice dripping with feigned politeness that barely masked his disdain. A bit, for Trevor, was an elastic concept. It stretched from 30 minutes to 5 hours, sometimes more, leaving Clara effectively imprisoned or scrambling for alternative parking. I watched it unfold from my porch swing, a silent, vigilant witness. The first time it happened, I saw Clara approach his car, a polite note clutched in her hand. She placed it under his wiper blade. I saw Trevor retrieve it, crumple it, and toss it onto the lawn as he drove away. That was my first hint of his true character. My internal monologue, usually reserved for property spreadsheets and lease agreements, began to include observations about him. His confidence wasn't earned. It was given, and he presumed it would never be revoked. I knew the drill. This was the opening act of a classic neighborhood drama. I'd seen it countless times in my rentals. A small transgression, met with a mild response, emboldens the perpetrator. Then it escalates. The notes turned into hesitant knocks on Trevor's door, Clara's voice barely audible through the thin walls. Trevor would open the door, flash that infuriating smile, offer a mumbled apology that meant nothing, and then repeat the offense within days. Clara, bless her heart, was too kind for her own good. She tried reasoning. She tried pleading. She even tried leaving early for work to avoid being blocked in, but Trevor seemed to have an uncanny knack for timing his parking precisely when she needed to leave or arrive. Her bright, hopeful eyes started to dim, replaced by a constant furrow in her brow. She'd sigh heavily when she saw his car, a defeated slump to her shoulders. It infuriated me, though I kept my face impassive. My unsentimental self wanted to tell her to be tougher, to call the police, to be more assertive. But my astute mind knew that people like Trevor thrived on the direct confrontation they could easily dismiss. They needed a different kind of lesson. One crisp October morning, I watched Clara, dressed in her nursing scrubs, pace frantically beside her car. Trevor's silver sedan was, as usual, a metal barricade across her driveway. She checked her watch, tapped her foot, then finally knocked on his door. No answer. She tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I saw her shoulders droop as she pulled out her phone, presumably calling a taxi or a rideshare service. Her shift started in less than an hour, and she was clearly going to be late. A surge of that familiar frustration washed over me. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was impacting her livelihood, her peace of mind. It was a brazen disregard for her basic right to access her own property. This wasn't some minor kerfuffle over a barking dog or overgrown hedges. This was a direct, repeated act of imposition, a power play that Trevor was clearly winning. He wasn't just blocking a driveway, he was asserting dominance over his quieter, more polite neighbor. He was preying on her good nature. I watched as Clara finally gave up, her expression a mix of despair and quiet rage. She walked down the street, calling out directions to her rideshare. The sight of her defeated figure, small against the backdrop of Trevor's imposing, unmoving car, cemented something in my mind. This wasn't just Clara's problem anymore. This was a breakdown of communal rules, a festering wound in the quiet fabric of Northwood Borough. It was precisely the kind of situation I had learned to despise over my years in property management, where one person's arrogance could disrupt an entire community. My pragmatic side kicked in. What were the options? Notes, conversations, even formal warnings had proven useless. The police had been called once by Clara after a particularly egregious, all-day blockage, but they'd simply left a note on his windshield, a piece of paper Trevor likely crumpled and ignored. The law, it seemed, wasn't designed for petty tyrants who exploited loopholes and relied on the apathy of others. The problem wasn't just Trevor's car, it was his mindset. He believed he was exempt. He saw Clara's kindness as weakness, her attempts at resolution as invitations for further disrespect. He needed a different kind of intervention, one that spoke his language. Consequences. Real, tangible consequences that hit him where it hurt, without involving protracted legal battles or messy confrontations that would only give him more attention. This was the kind of situation that, if left unchecked, would only grow worse, exactly as I had seen with other difficult tenants. A few days later, I saw Clara tending her small flower bed, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked tired. I walked over, making it seem like a casual stroll. "Morning, Clara," I said, my voice calm. She straightened up, a tired smile touching her lips. "Morning, Sage. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," I agreed, glancing subtly at Trevor's driveway. It was empty for now. "How are things holding up with everything?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, you know, same old, same old." He was at it again yesterday. I nearly missed my appointment with the specialist. She sighed. "I just don't understand why he does it. I've been nothing but polite." "Politeness, Clara," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "is sometimes mistaken for permission by certain individuals." I watched her eyes. They held a flicker of understanding, a recognition of something she hadn't quite articulated. "You've tried all the usual avenues, haven't you?" She nodded, a wave of resignation washing over her. "Notes, talking, even called the non-emergency line. They said it's a civil matter unless it's an emergency vehicle access issue. It's just so frustrating." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm starting to hate coming home. My own driveway feels like a trap." That was it. That was the moment. Hearing her voice waver, seeing the genuine distress in her eyes, it wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about her sense of security, her peace of mind, her very right to feel safe and unmolested in her own home. My unsentimental core didn't suddenly grow soft, but it recognized the profound injustice. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a form of psychological bullying, and Trevor was doing it with impunity. This was a textbook case of entitlement, and it needed to be addressed with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "Clara," I began, my voice steady, "have you considered having his car towed?" Her eyes widened. "Towed? Oh, I couldn't. That seems so extreme." "Is being consistently blocked in, risking your job, and losing your peace of mind not extreme?" I countered gently. My approach was always direct. I didn't sugarcoat. "It's a valid option. A last resort, perhaps, but certainly a valid one." She bit her lip, considering. "I don't even know how to go about that." "And what if he retaliates?" "That's where planning comes in," I said, a subtle shift in my posture. My mind was already racing, sifting through the logistical complexities, weighing potential risks against desired outcomes. You have a right to your driveway. It's private property. He's trespassing, effectively. Most tow companies operate within the parameters of local ordinances. If you're the property owner and it's your private driveway, it's usually straightforward. I paused, letting the information sink in. And as for retaliation, that's a risk with any confrontation. But sometimes, a decisive action is the only thing that gets through to people like him. It's not about being aggressive, it's about establishing boundaries. Firmly. My past experiences managing tenant disputes flooded my mind. The ones who drew a clear line in the sand, however reluctantly, were often the ones who found peace. The ones who allowed themselves to be walked over often spiraled into worse situations. Clara looked at me, a glimmer of something new in her eyes, not anger, but a flicker of resolve. I hadn't really thought of it. It just seemed like such a big step. Sometimes the big steps are the only ones that make a difference, I affirmed. Think about it, research it. And if you need help navigating the process, finding a reputable company, figuring out the paperwork, you let me know. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was offering to be an ally, and my pragmatic side was already calculating the optimal time for a tow. It needed to be impactful. It needed to be memorable. It needed to hit him hard enough that he wouldn't dare repeat the offense. It wasn't about anger for me, but about restoring equilibrium. "Thank you, Sage," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I really appreciate it." I simply nodded, giving her a small, encouraging smile. The seed had been planted. Now, it was a matter of waiting for the right moment, for Trevor to provide the final, undeniable provocation. My astute observation skills, honed by years of managing properties and their often turbulent inhabitants, told me it wouldn't be long. Trevor's arrogance was a reliable engine of self-destruction. As I walked back to my porch, I silently considered the nuances of local towing regulations, the best hours for such an operation, and the kind of tow company that wouldn't hesitate. This was the kind of intricate problem-solving that my pragmatic mind truly relished. It was a problem, and I intended to solve it. For Clara, yes, but also for the principle of the thing, for the quiet preservation of order in Northwood Borough. And for anyone who might find themselves watching this story, wondering if justice could truly be served for the small but insidious injustices, remember to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 2. Struggle, the desperation and descent into darkness. The weeks following my conversation with Clara were a slow, agonizing slide into a deeper kind of despair for her, and a sharpening of my resolve. Trevor Blackwood, as if sensing the unspoken threat in the air, seemed to double down on his obnoxious behavior. He became bolder, his "I'm just here for a bit" excuses more sarcastic, his apologies non-existent. He wasn't just blocking Clara's driveway now. He was making a show of it. I'd see him pull up, often late in the evening, sometimes with friends in his car, and deliberately park his beat-up silver sedan directly across Clara's access point. He'd glance at her house, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips before disappearing inside his own rental. It was a deliberate act of provocation, a blatant disregard for a boundary he knew he was violating. He was testing the limits, pushing Clara to her breaking point, and in doing so, pushing me closer to mine. Clara, despite our talk, still hesitated. The fear of confrontation, of escalating the situation, held her captive. She tried alternative solutions. She parked her car a block away, walking home with groceries in the rain, rather than risking the driveway blockade. She started leaving earlier for work, setting her alarm for absurdly early hours, only to find Trevor's car already there, sometimes parked since the night before. I watched her from my kitchen window, sipping my morning coffee as she stood by her car, shoulders slumped, a silent plea in her posture. My unsentimental core acknowledged the futility of her efforts. This wasn't about finding workarounds. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Her job, as a junior nurse at the bustling Northwood Medical Center, was demanding, requiring punctuality and a clear head. The constant stress of wondering if her driveway would be blocked, of potentially being late for critical shifts, began to take a visible toll. Her usually vibrant personality dimmed. She became quieter, more withdrawn. I'd see her jump at unexpected noises, her nerves frayed. She started looking over her shoulder when she walked from her car to her front door, a subtle but undeniable sign that she felt unsafe, even on her own property. I tried to intervene subtly, reminding myself of my role as a vigilant witness and potential ally. I looked up local ordinances, printed out excerpts, and discreetly slipped them into Clara's mailbox, highlighted with a yellow marker. I even compiled a list of reputable local towing companies, complete with their operating hours and estimated costs. I wrote it all in my neat, clear handwriting, devoid of any emotional flourish. This was data. This was pragmatic advice. "Clara," I said one afternoon, finding her weeding her front yard, looking perpetually exhausted. "I did some research. You have every right to have that vehicle removed. It's considered an unauthorized vehicle on private property if it's blocking your access. The borough codes are quite clear." She sighed, pulling at a stubborn weed. "I know, Sage, I keep hoping he'll stop. Maybe if I just ignore him, he'll get bored. People like Trevor don't get bored when their actions go unchallenged," I stated, my voice even. "They get emboldened. This isn't about him getting bored, Clara. It's about him realizing there are consequences to his actions. He hasn't had to face any, not real ones, for a very long time." Her lower lip trembled slightly. "He just makes me feel so small and helpless. What if he does something worse? What if he vandalizes my car or my house?" My pragmatic mind assessed the risk. Vandalism was a possibility, yes, but statistically, direct retaliation of that nature was rare compared to continued passive aggression. Trevor was a bully, but he seemed to prefer psychological warfare to outright criminal acts. "That's a risk you weigh against the cost of living like this," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Is living in constant fear, losing sleep, jeopardizing your job, worth avoiding a potential confrontation? Think about the peace of mind you'd regain." But Clara still couldn't bring herself to make the call. She was paralyzed by fear and a deeply ingrained politeness that was being exploited. I understood it. My unsentimental nature sometimes made me forget that not everyone could detach from emotion as easily as I could. I recognized that her emotional toll was becoming severe. Her once neat front yard was starting to show signs of neglect, her flowers wilting slightly, weeds encroaching. It was a metaphor for her spirit. The situation escalated dramatically one Friday evening. I was on my porch, enjoying the quiet hum of twilight, when I saw a procession of cars pull up to Trevor's house. Loud music started blaring. Headlights flashed across my windows. It was clear Trevor was hosting one of his infamous parties. Usually these were contained affairs, but tonight he seemed to have invited half of Northwood Borough. Cars began spilling over from his property, lining the street. And then I saw it. Another car, a sleek black pickup, parked directly across Clara's driveway, completely blocking her in, while Trevor's silver sedan remained, as always, parked directly opposite, creating a near-impassable gauntlet. Clara had arrived home just before the party started, pulling into her driveway just in time, but now she was trapped. Hours passed. The noise levels soared. Trevor and his friends were loud, boisterous, their laughter echoing across the street. Around 11 o'clock, I saw Clara's porch light flick on. She was standing there, a small, solitary figure staring at the blocked driveway, her hands pressed to her temples. She was crying. I could see the glistening tracks on her cheeks in the dim light. She looked utterly defeated, broken. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a nuisance anymore. This was open contempt, a direct assault on her sanctuary. My frustration, usually a slow, internal simmer, began to boil. This was a dispute far worse than a blocked driveway. This was emotional abuse, perpetrated by an entitled brute. My years of property management had shown me the insidious nature of such conflicts, how they eroded lives, how they could push even the strongest individuals to their breaking points. Clara had reached hers, and in witnessing it, I felt a shift within myself. My role as a vigilant witness was transforming. I was no longer merely observing. I was actively absorbing her pain, and it was becoming intolerable. I went inside, grabbed my phone, and hesitated for a split second. My pragmatic mind ran through scenarios. If I called the police, they might just ask Trevor to move the car or issue a fine that he'd laugh off. That wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't provide the lasting impact, the unforgettable lesson. It wouldn't hit him where it truly mattered. This wasn't just about Clara's driveway anymore. It was about principle. It was about every entitled tenant I'd ever had, every resident who thought the rules didn't apply to them, every small injustice that chipped away at the fabric of communal living. My unsentimental nature told me that true change only came from significant, uncomfortable consequences. My astute mind was already calculating the most impactful move. I knew Trevor's routine, or lack thereof. He was a creature of habit only when it served him. His car was rarely moved unless he was going out. I had observed his comings and goings for months. I knew he often went out on weekend nights, presumably dates. He primped, he preened. He cared about his image. This was his Achilles heel. I returned to my porch. The party was still raging. Clara had retreated inside, her light extinguished. The street was still blocked. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled through the list of towing companies I'd researched. I specifically looked for one that operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and didn't shy away from difficult situations. I found one a few towns over, a company called Swift Recovery and Towing, notorious for their efficiency and strict adherence to towing laws. Their website proudly proclaimed, "We clear your problem legally and swiftly." That sounded about right. My finger hovered over the call button. This was it. The moment I shifted from passive witness to active participant. This wasn't just a suggestion to Clara anymore. It was a decision I was about to execute on her behalf, without her direct knowledge. Some might call it overstepping, but my pragmatic mind saw it as necessary. Clara was too deep in her emotional turmoil to act. Someone had to. And I, Sage Kincaid, the vigilant witness who had seen countless disputes, felt a profound, undeniable compulsion to be that someone. For her, for the principle, and for the simple restoration of order. This was the rock bottom, not just for Clara, but for the quiet tolerance of the neighborhood. This was the moment I stopped hoping for change and decided to enact it. My unsentimental core, far from shrinking, hardened into resolve. I would not allow this casual cruelty to continue. I pressed call. And if you're finding yourself invested in the struggles of individuals fighting for their rights, remember to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Act 3. Revenge the reckoning, its execution, and the aftermath. The chill of the Northwood Borough night air did little to calm the quiet hum of adrenaline that coursed through me. After my call to Swift Recovery and Towing, I had retreated to my living room, the blinds drawn, but my ears keenly attuned to the sounds outside. The party at Trevor's had finally wound down around 2 a.m, leaving behind a silence that felt almost deafening after hours of blaring music and raucous laughter. The black pickup, still brazenly blocking Clara's driveway, remained. Trevor's silver sedan was parked just down the street, still opposite Clara's access point. My heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic thrum against my ribs, but my mind remained clear, focused. This was a delicate operation, requiring precision and an almost surgical detachment. The tow truck arrived silently, almost imperceptibly, just as the first hints of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple. It was a large, flatbed truck, nondescript and efficient. The driver, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, followed my precise instructions. I had met him outside, speaking in low, clear tones, pointing out Clara's property lines, explaining the repeated infractions, showing him photographs I'd taken over the past weeks as evidence of the continuous obstruction. My pragmatic approach, laying out the facts without embellishment, seemed to resonate with him. He was here to do a job, legally and efficiently. Within minutes, the black pickup was expertly winched onto the flatbed. The driver completed the necessary paperwork, confirming Clara's address and my statement as a witness to the ongoing violation. He informed me that the vehicle would be taken to their impound lot, and the owner would be responsible for all fees, towing, storage, and any administrative penalties. It was a sizable sum, I knew, designed to be a deterrent. As the tow truck rumbled away, the pickup a silhouette against the rising sun, a profound sense of quiet satisfaction settled over me. One less obstacle, one small victory, but the main target remained. I knew the biggest impact would come from hitting Trevor when he least expected it, when his arrogance was at its peak. My astute observations had paid off. I had noticed, over the past few weeks, a pattern. Trevor had a penchant for online dating, specifically through an app I deduced was Tinder from snippets of his loud phone conversations and the parade of neatly dressed young women who occasionally appeared at his doorstep. He meticulously prepared for these dates, showering, dousing himself in cologne, fussing over his hair. He valued his image, perhaps above all else. This was his vulnerability. My plan began to coalesce, leveraging this insight. It wasn't enough to simply tow his car. It had to be a public humiliation, a moment of maximum discomfort. and it had to be undeniably linked to his actions, a clear, unmistakable consequence of his blatant disregard for others. Days passed. Clara still looked tired, but the absence of the black pickup, and the knowledge that at least that obstacle was gone, seemed to bring a sliver of peace back into her life. Trevor, meanwhile, was a storm of frustration. He had recovered his friend's truck, but the cost must have stung. I heard him ranting on his phone, slamming doors, his usual swagger replaced by a tense, agitated energy. His silver sedan, however, still frequently graced the street opposite Clara's driveway, a persistent, passive-aggressive reminder of his entitlement. He had learned nothing yet. Then, last week, as the late afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over Northwood Borough, I saw it. Trevor's ritual. He emerged from his house, freshly showered, hair meticulously styled, the unmistakable scent of overly strong cologne wafting across the street. He was wearing a crisp shirt, not his usual faded t-shirts. He checked his reflection in a small hand mirror, smoothing his eyebrows. This was it. A Tinder date. And of course his crusty silver sedan was precisely where I expected it, fully blocking Clara's driveway. Again, I felt a surge of resolve, cold and clear. This wasn't anger. This was the meticulous execution of a plan. My unsentimental core saw only the steps required. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady. I had saved Swift Recovery and Towing's number. I dialed. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'd like to report a vehicle blocking a private driveway. Same address as last time, 142 Elm Street. It's a silver sedan, license plate XYZ 1234. Owner is currently inside the adjacent property, 140 Elm Street. They are about to leave for an appointment." I gave the specific location of the car, detailed its obstruction, and stressed the repetitive nature of the offense. I made sure to mention the previous tow. The dispatcher recognized my voice. "Understood, ma'am. We'll have a truck there within the hour." I thanked her, hung up, and settled onto my porch swing, a cold can of beer in my hand. The air was still warm, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the oak trees lining the street. I wasn't usually a beer drinker, but it felt appropriate for the occasion, a prop in my carefully constructed scene. I wanted to appear utterly casual, completely unconcerned, just another neighbor enjoying the evening. About 45 minutes later, the distinct, low rumble of a heavy-duty engine grew louder. The Swift Recovery and Towing truck, the same flatbed as before, turned the corner, its yellow lights flashing discreetly. The same driver was behind the wheel. He gave me a quick nod as he maneuvered the truck into position. He was a professional, no doubt about it. He knew the drill. He carefully backed up to Trevor's silver sedan. The mechanical whine of the winch filled the quiet street as the hooks engaged, lifting the front wheels of the car. It was surprisingly fast, a testament to the driver's skill. Within minutes, Trevor's car was suspended, then expertly pulled onto the flatbed. The driver secured it, did a quick check, and then approached me, holding a clipboard. "That'll be all, ma'am," he said, handing me the receipt copy. "Another one for the books." He tipped his cap. "He'll be picking this one up from the Northwood impound lot again. This time the fines are stiffer, given it's a repeat offense within a month." "Excellent," I said, my voice perfectly level. I felt no triumph, no glee, just a deep, quiet satisfaction. This was simply a problem being solved. I watched as the tow truck pulled away, Trevor's car a pathetic sight, dangling ignominiously off the back of the truck, disappearing down the street. The driveway, for the first time in weeks, was completely clear. I settled back onto my porch swing, taking a slow sip of my beer. The light was fading fast now, the streetlights flickering on. The air was still, pregnant with anticipation. It was almost showtime. A few minutes later, I saw her. A young woman, clearly dressed for a date, her hair done up, a stylish dress and small, delicate heels clicking on the sidewalk. She was a pretty girl, looking a little confused as she approached Trevor's empty parking spot. She glanced around, then walked directly up to Trevor's front door and knocked. Trevor appeared almost instantly, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, a wide, confident smile on his face. He was clearly ready for his evening. He stepped out, his gaze sweeping the street, presumably looking for his car. His smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. He looked around wildly, like someone had robbed him. The girl, seeing his sudden shift in demeanor, looked even more confused. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice light and a little hesitant. Trevor's eyes were darting everywhere, his perfectly coiffed hair now slightly askew as he turned his head sharply from side to side. He ran a hand through his hair, his mouth opened slightly, a desperate, bewildered expression replacing his earlier swagger. He looked lost, utterly disoriented. "My car," he exclaimed, his voice rising, a note of panic creeping in. "Where's my car? It was just here." He started walking in quick, agitated circles on his lawn, his date watching him, bewildered. I leaned forward slightly on my porch swing, keeping my voice casual, almost conversational, as if simply making an observation to myself, yet ensuring it carried across the quiet street. "If you're looking for your car, Trevor," I called out, my voice clear and steady in the twilight, "it got towed. You were blocking Clara's driveway, again." My words hung in the air, crisp and undeniable. Trevor froze. His head snapped towards me, his eyes wide, disbelief warring with sudden, dawning rage. He opened his mouth, a torrent of angry words clearly forming, but before he could unleash them, the girl spoke. "Wait," she said, her voice laced with sudden clarity. She looked from the empty spot to Trevor, then at me. "You parked in front of his driveway," Trevor stammered, his carefully constructed composure crumbling around him. "No, I mean, I was just there for a minute, it was just a little bit, I always move it, she's exaggerating." He gestured vaguely towards Clara's house, now dark and silent. His words were rushed, desperate, laced with indignation that rang hollow. The girl's gaze hardened. She looked at Trevor, a slow, deliberate assessment in her eyes. "So you did park in front of someone's driveway, repeatedly?" She didn't wait for an answer. She shook her head, a small, disgusted sound escaping her lips. Her eyes held not anger but profound disappointment, a sudden, stark realization of his true character. "Wow. That's trash." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words were a quiet, surgical strike, aimed directly at his inflated ego. She turned on her heel, her small heels clicking purposefully on the sidewalk, and walked away. She didn't look back. She simply left, leaving Trevor standing alone on his lawn, bathed in the fading light, his face a mask of shock and utter humiliation. His mouth was still slightly open, his hand still suspended in a half-gestured denial. The silence that followed her departure was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant murmur of traffic. I watched him. He stood there for a long moment, processing the swift, brutal blow to his confidence. His shoulders slumped. His eyes, usually so arrogant, were filled with something akin to despair. He looked utterly deflated, like a balloon suddenly punctured. He finally turned and stumbled back into his house, slamming the door with a pathetic thud that lacked its usual force. I finished my beer, the cool metal comforting in my hand. Justice, in this instance, felt less like triumph and more like the careful rebalancing of scales. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about restoring order, about delivering a clear, undeniable message that entitlement would not go unchecked in Northwood Borough. It was a tangible consequence for a chronic disregard of communal rules. The aftermath was immediate and palpable. I hadn't seen Trevor block Clara's driveway since. His silver sedan now consistently occupied a spot on his own property, or further down the street, far away from Clara's access. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a subdued, almost furtive demeanor. I saw him occasionally, entering or leaving his house, but he no longer made eye contact. His booming laughter was absent from the street. He didn't host any more loud parties. The parade of women stopped coming to his door. His social life, or at least the part he showcased so loudly, seemed to have evaporated. His confidence had taken a major, perhaps irreparable, hit. Clara's transformation was equally profound. The tired lines around her eyes softened. Her shoulders lost their perpetual slump. She started tending her garden again, her movements lighter, more joyful. I saw her walking to her car in the mornings, a subtle spring in her step, no longer scanning the street with apprehension. The simple act of being able to use her own driveway, without fear or frustration, had given her back a sense of security and peace. She gave me a grateful wave one afternoon, a genuine, radiant smile on her face that reached her eyes. I simply nodded, acknowledging the quiet understanding between us. For me, Sage Kincaid, the vigilant witness and ally, there was no grand celebration. Just a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. My pragmatic approach had yielded the desired result. My unsentimental nature allowed me to view the outcome dispassionately, as a successful resolution to a complex problem. The principle had been upheld. The rules, once casually disregarded, were now implicitly enforced. The twist, perhaps, was not in a sudden revelation, but in the ripple effect. News travels fast in a quiet borough like Northwood. Word of Trevor's public humiliation, though perhaps embellished, certainly spread among his social circles. I heard snippets of gossip from neighborhood acquaintances, observations about Trevor becoming a pariah, someone whose arrogance had finally caught up to him. He was becoming a cautionary tale, a vivid example of what happens when entitlement meets an immovable force. It was a quiet form of justice, played out not just on one street, but echoing through the subtle social networks of the community. And as I continued my daily life, observing the nuances of human behavior in my quiet corner of Pennsylvania, I knew that while this particular dispute was resolved, my vigilance would always remain. There would always be another Trevor, another instance of entitlement, and another moment where the scales of justice needed a firm, pragmatic hand to rebalance them. So, for more stories where the entitled get their comeuppance, where the lines are drawn and crossed, and where quiet people find their powerful voice, subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.